Hey, everybody. Welcome back to the Lead Management Masterminds podcast. But we do it a little special now. We do it the live editions. Happy to have you guys back with us today. It's been a while since we've been on, but we're starting a really cool summer series here that I'm excited to tell you guys more about here in just a moment. Excited to have with me today, back with us today, Ben Schor, principal consultant, solutions engineer, and a number of other things here at SDP Solutions, is on with us again today. Also have a new member with us as well, Kevin Benner, who is our new director of business development, joined the company just a few months ago. And so excited for everyone to learn more about Kevin and what he is doing with SDP. So that said, I mentioned the three-part series. We're going to be kicking that off today. We'll have the next scheduled in the next week or two. Really have been spending a lot of time on really defining what are our best practices. We as an organization come from multiple places and have done multiple things in our years, and we really spent a lot of time to go through and understand what are our best practices, what are our combined best practices. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about, Ben's going to talk more about what that actually looks like today and how we got there and what we've been doing to do these things. But the three-part series I'm really excited to announce are going to be, today we're doing the Velocify Encompass integration best practices. We've also spent a lot of time developing and understanding what are the best practices with purchase in like a consumer direct environment, or just using lead management best practices with purchase. And then last but not least, really spending time on duplicate management best practices. As a lot of you guys know who are listening, duplicate management can be a little scary, can be a little confusing. And so we've really taken the time to develop what are our best practices around successful duplicate management best practices. So we're going to talk more about that over the next couple of weeks. But let me go ahead and turn it over to Ben real quick and talk a little bit about how we got to where we're at on this journey of developing our best practices. And then we'll go from there.
Yeah, thanks, Scott. Appreciate it. So when I think about best practices, it's funny. I think about the ideas that anyone might have for best practices, and then how to actually implement those and make something happen, right? And we hear about best practices ideas all over the place for everything on webinars or podcasts like this, right? Where we'll come in and we'll say, here's an idea, here's an idea, here's an idea, which all sounds great, but then there's how do we actually make those things happen? And when you're thinking about, let's say, the lead management world, any best practices concept, you're going to take it to implement it in a bunch of different ways. And it all really depends on things like what software you use, as an example, right? Some loan officers might be using Excel, some might be using Velocify, some might be using Accelerate, some might be using Salesforce, some might be writing notes on the back of their hand or on their Post-its. Who knows what it might be? But there's those two parts. There's the ideas, and then there's actually getting it done. And the reason I mention this is because from my experience, specifically when I was working for Velocify, I was in all different kind of roles. And if you think about kind of the life cycle that a company has when buying software and using it, you got to buy the software, implement it, and then you need ongoing support. And I was on the Velocify side of all of those things. And during those different phases, it was interesting because the idea of best practices, although it's there, it's quite often in pieces at times. It can be difficult. So like during the sales process, I often, I can't see myself anymore. Are we all still good?
Yeah, we're good.
Okay, cool. Oh, good. When I was on the sales side of things as a pre-sales engineer, people would ask me questions. Can we do this? Can we do this? Can we do this? And the answer would just be yes, yes, no, yes, right? Or if we were talking about concepts, it'd say, can we do this type of thing? And from a best practice standpoint, the answer would just be yes, we can do that. But it doesn't really get into the details there. When it comes to the implementation, you just go ahead and implement the software. There's a certain kind of core way to do it. And as a lender, you don't necessarily know exactly where those gotchas are. And your implementation team, they know, but they might not know how specifically it applies to you. And then the ongoing support. And for me, ongoing support is on a lot of these things is like playing whack-a-mole, right? If you've ever played that game where the thing pops up, you knock it down. Another one pops up, you knock it down. And especially for something like we're going to talk about here today on the Encompass side of things, but also duplicate management and many other things, that's what ends up happening. Is you think you have a good solution, problem pops up, and you say, oh, we'll put in a fix right there. But how does that fix affect here? And you can kind of go around from circles forever. In my first or second week here at SDP Solutions, I was working with another consultant, and they asked me, they said, well, I'm having this specific problem in Velocify as it pertains to Encompass. How do I fix this thing? And don't tell me to do this because I did that and then it caused this problem. And that's where you go kind of round and round. And that's what I'm really excited about working at SDP Solutions is it's true consulting, which gives us the opportunity to take a step back from all of these individual whack-a-mole fixes and say, what should the big picture look like? And that's what all of our best practices is really all about.
Awesome. Well, thanks for kicking that off. We also have Kevin on or with us as well, as I mentioned. Kevin comes most recently from a lender, and so was on the front lines of this, if you will, from dealing with it day to day. We were talking earlier this morning about how much time was spent just handling this each day, and handling duplicates and all of the stuff that comes along with the Encompass integration. Kevin, can you talk a little bit about your past and your history with dealing with challenges? It's not it's not the worst thing in the world, but it's challenges that can really make the business more efficient if it's optimized.
For sure, there's a lot of. I mean, I look at the one word to describe it is frustration. I mean, there's a lot of frustration in regards at times with regards to your Encompass sync, just because there's a lot of variables. But ultimately, what you want to be able to do is make sure that. And I think where my frustration a lot of times on the lender side was are my loans attributing to a lead appropriately? And at times, like for example, a consumer may have 3 different properties getting refinanced at the same time. One done through a sync through Velocify, 2 more done through Consumer Connects that the borrower just filled out, and now, how and where do I attribute that marketing dollars to, and how do I track that to the particular lead inside of Velocify? Became a lot. It became whack-a-mole. It became we spent a lot of time, hours every day, chasing down things instead of having like a real finite plan on how to minimize the impact that those different variables would have.
Awesome. Well, I'm gonna turn it back over to Ben. Ben, you want to jump right in? We're going to try to keep this one short a little today, not go the full hour, give everyone their time back on a Friday. So Ben, why don't you jump right in and let's start talking through what some of these best practices look like.
Yeah, and before we get into the details of them, I wanted to kind of address some of what Kevin said just a moment ago, where you see these things not happening in Velocify and in Encompass kind of the way you want in terms of attribution and what to do about it. And when we think about the attribution, there's kind of 2 components to it, right? There's making sure that the loan in Encompass is attributed to the lead in Velocify appropriately, and we'll talk a little bit about what that can mean. And then there's the lead source attribution part as well, right? If there's a new loan created in Encompass, in certain scenarios, well, to what lead source should that be attributed as you kind of bring it back full circle to the Velocify side of things? And as Kevin was saying, there's so many different scenarios that need to be accounted for, many of which do have to do with multiple loans for a given borrower, which we'll talk about in specific in a moment. But it's really the best example when we think about some of these best practices, because what ends up happening, and anyone who's watching this, who's tried to troubleshoot will know exactly what I'm talking about, where you see that you look in a lead in Velocify and you're trying to figure out, wait, I don't understand why there's 2 different loans that are synced to this one lead. That doesn't make sense to me. Let's fix it. Let's separate it out. And they did that specifically because of the types of loans that are in Encompass. And then, I don't know, a month later, they'll come back to their Velocify and they'll say, wait a second, why do I have 2 separate leads in here? It should be one lead with 2 of those loans syncing into the same lead in Velocify. But why would it be one way one time and one way the other time? And to Kevin's point, it's because of the specifics of what's going on. You can't treat all of these things the same. And you think you're treating a whole category the same, but it's because you're not looking at the larger set of scenarios. And that's where our overall kind of best practices come in, is ideally you don't want Band-Aids. You want to be able to kind of see the bigger picture. Before I get into some of those specifics, I do have a little disclaimer here that I want to mention, and you'll hear this same disclaimer from all of us at SDP on all of these best practices discussions, which is the best practices that we provide target specific things that need to be addressed, and then we tell you the way that we recommend you address them. It doesn't mean that it's a one-size-fits-all. There's going to be times for certain organizations where you're going to say, no, Ben, we don't want to do it that way for addressing that scenario. We want to do it another way, which is perfectly fine. But the important part is that you address it. So today, I'm not going to talk about specifics of how to address these things, because that's not the point of this. The point is to understand what needs to be addressed. And then after you have a chance to watch this video or live, however you're watching it, and kind of take that all in, you may look at it and say, oh, cool, we didn't realize we needed to address this and this. We're going to go ahead and do that ourselves, which is totally cool. Or you might say, you know what, we know what we want to do, but we don't really know how to do it, in which case maybe you reach out to us at SDP to help you do it. Or maybe you come and you say, okay, I know we need to address it, but I have no idea how we should address it. We're looking for some recommendations. That's when we would bring some of our best practices and the specifics of how to address them. But overall, the goal here is just to know what are the things that need to be addressed.
Yeah, and every organization being different, right? They have different groups who maybe aren't in Velocify or what have you, and so you have to address that a lot differently. So yeah, to Ben's point, I think that's where we come in, is we're able to really look at the situation, understand the entire picture of things, and then develop a custom best practice around each organization. So yeah. One thing I forgot to mention is, and I have it scrolling down here on the bottom, is if you have any questions throughout this, feel free to submit a comment, whether you're watching on YouTube or LinkedIn. It will feed into our software here, and we'll be able to address those questions here at the end if people have any.
Very good. Thanks, Scott. Okay, so I've got these best practices split up into two categories: the necessities, things that you definitely need to be thinking about, and then kind of the bonus items, which are things that you're going to want to decide if you want to include or not. I'm going to do the bonus items first because they're a little bit more interesting. The first one is pre-approval follow-up. We all know, especially in the purchase market, the importance of following up with your pre-approvals or pre-qualifications or whatever you're doing, and how the terminology that you're using. And the interesting thing about pre-approvals as it pertains to Velocify and Encompass is, if you ask any lender, where are your loan officers tracking a pre-approval and how are they tracking them, you're going to get different answers from almost everyone. And the reason is because Velocify does not come out of the box with kind of a real robust pre-approval piece. Plus, most pre-approvals have to be done, including pricing and credit and things of that nature, which Velocify doesn't do, right? And then on the Encompass side, Encompass does not have like a milestone for pre-approval, right? It's got a few things, but most of it is customized. So if a lender is using Velocify and or Encompass for pre-approval tracking, each one's probably doing it somewhat differently. And some lenders, if you ask them, they say, my loan officers track their pre-approvals themselves. It's in Excel, it's on notepads, whatever it might be. In the end, if you can just make sure you're tracking pre-approvals either in Velocify or in Encompass, you can then use Velocify for your pre-approval follow-up. There are many ways to do this. Again, I mentioned this as a bonus item because it's not something you necessarily need to do, but it's a huge piece that you can add if you're not doing it right now. If you want to track it in Velocify, pretty straightforward for you or for SDP to help you to get that tracking in Velocify. If not, and you're looking to do it in Encompass, or it's already in an Encompass, and from a compliance standpoint, that's quite often what lenders would rather do, that's when it comes into this conversation around the Encompass sync. And there are numerous different ways that we can sync that data from Encompass into Velocify. And once it's synced, then you can use all the Velocify magic to do any kind of pre-approval follow-up that you're looking for. So again, the reason why it's in this discussion is because for most lenders, they're going to at least think about doing some kind of pre-approval tracking in Encompass. You're going to want to sync it to Velocify using one of the many methods that we can provide. And then you kind of run with it from there.
I think one thing I would add here too is that, from a first-time home buyer perspective, as you're working with first-time home buyers, this follow-up is so key. They don't know the process. They don't know what to do exactly. And if you're not there holding their hand every step of the way, there's a chance that they're going to find someone who will. I was reading some surveys that were done for one of our clients recently and going through and looking at some of the quotes that people had. And I kept seeing a common theme of, I felt like, I was involved, or I felt like I was up to date, or I felt like I knew what to do, all along the way. And a lot of that is because this lender has really done a good job of implementing, a prioritization around the different milestones throughout the Encompass journey. It may not be just a pre-approval. That's a great place to start. But as that gets further into offers accepted or gets to underwriting, and they need certain things, to have that prioritization in Velocify as a part of this is really key in the purchase market itself.
For sure. And that's actually a really good segue into the second bonus item. And I'll go quickly through this one because it probably applies to a small percentage of those who are watching. The second thing is, Scott was talking about keeping your customers up to date on what's going on. Well, keeping realtors up to date, we know, is crucial as well when we're talking about these purchase transactions. My guess is that most of you watching this already have something in place to automatically send updates to realtors as loans are progressing. But anyone who doesn't have an automated process for that, I guarantee is thinking, why are we not doing that? How are we not doing that? And many lenders have a true mortgage CRM type of tool, something like Encompass CRM, Total Expert, things of that nature. And if you have that and it's working, you're good. Don't even worry about what I'm about to talk about. But some lenders don't have something like that to send those automated updates to realtors. And you can sync your realtor data from Encompass into Velocify and use Velocify to send those types of updates. As we know, setting up quick emails like that is actually pretty straightforward in Velocify. So if you're one of the lenders who is not currently sending automated updates to realtors to keep them up to date as the loan is progressing, if you're not doing that right now, you're going to want to either get this going on your own or reach out to us at SDP, because it won't take more than a week or two. You just have to write a little bit of email content. It won't take more than a week or two to get this up and running. So it's fairly low hanging fruit, and it's extremely impactful when you think about how much realtors want to know what's going on, because if they feel in the dark, they're much less likely to send you business. But we all know that. Scott, Kevin, anything else from you guys before I move on to the necessities?
I think you're nailing it, man. It's a good start.
Yeah.
A lot here for sure.
So like I said, those were kind of the bonus items. And for anyone who hopped on here to say, I'm frustrated with my Encompass sync, you're probably thinking, Ben, get through that stuff, because let's get to the real meat of what we're doing here. And that's what we're going to talk about now. When you're talking about matching loans to leads in Velocify, as I mentioned beforehand, you have to understand what's really going on with the loans in Encompass in order to make sure that they're being handled properly in Velocify. And the first way that we do this is with adverse loan tracking. We know that Encompass has numerous different ways that you can flag a lead as being adverse. Of course, we're talking about declined, withdrawn, things like that. And Encompass provides a few different ways to do it, whether it's the loan folder, if you have another custom field, it could be numerous different things. But knowing whether a loan in Encompass was marked as adverse or not is one of the key things to stop that game of whack-a-mole. Because like I said, you can look at one lead in Velocify that's syncing from two different loans in Encompass and say it shouldn't be doing that. But then you can look at one lead in Velocify that's separated. So you've got two leads in Velocify for two leads in Encompass, and you say, no, I don't want that. I want it to be together. What you may or may not realize is I've found almost all the time, the reason that we want it one way versus the other way is because in some circumstances, when a loan has been declined, withdrawn, and you now want to create a second loan for that same borrower, it's the same transaction. We're going to talk more about this in a second. It's the same transaction. Other times, it's not the same transaction. How do we usually know that? Based off of whether that first loan was adverse or not. So we need to get that data from Encompass. We've got at SDP, we've got some tricks to explain to you about the different ways that you can get that data from Encompass, but getting it from Encompass into Velocify is crucial to then allow you to not play that game of whack-a-mole moving forward. So that's the adverse loan tracking. It's kind of the first piece. It's a simple thing because it could be one, maybe two data points, but it's the most important part that leads into the next topic to discuss, which is multiple loans for a given borrower, which is what Kevin talked about. It's one of the biggest pain points that lenders have when they're going back and they're doing their lead source attribution. They're trying to figure out, hey, we had 6 leads, but we've got 10 loans, and how does that match up one-to-one? Trying to figure that all out. This is the key to all of that.
By the way, Ben, there was a comment that came through, not on this, but through my text messages on my phone, where someone had just asked, how do I handle adverse loans? And so here we are.
Here we are. So before I get into any specifics, as I said, there are different ways that you may want to handle this. In fact, I was discussing this exact topic with an old Velocify colleague of mine, and they were telling me that there's one lender who specifically decided that they wanted to handle adverse loans very differently than what our best practices are. And that's fine. as long as you're addressing it in some way, as I mentioned beforehand. One other quick heads up. If you set up your Velocify in the past 3-4 months, something of that nature, you may have some of this adverse loan tracking already because it's now become part of a basic implementation. But if you've set up your Velocify before 3 or 4 months ago, which I would guess is maybe everyone who's watching this, you probably don't have it. So again, first step is just getting the data into Velocify. And then, to Scott's point, what do we do with it? Our basic best practices is as follows, but again, it does not have to be this way. It's all about how you handle the duplicate checking. That's what it's about, right? Because you have a loan that's in Encompass, and now you have another loan that's in Encompass. That first loan that's in Encompass matches with the original lead in Velocify, right? So first lead in Velocify, lead in Encompass. Now we have our loan in Encompass. Now we have a second loan in Encompass. What happens with that second loan? There's two basic possibilities, right? One is that second loan should kind of merge-ish into that same lead, and one is that second loan should create a new lead. Can't say it enough. There's reasons to do it both ways. What we see is if that first loan is adverse, then the second loan that you create is for the same opportunity that the first loan was created for. So you're going to want to sync that second loan back to the original lead. That's in general what we say. Now, there's a bunch of technical things to make all this happen. This is not easy, and that's not going to get into all that right now. But if you're comfortable handling it on your own, cool. My recommendation will be to reach out to SDP Solutions, or at the very least, someone at Velocify support, because if you're not 100% positive what you're doing with this, it can get dicey quickly. So keep that in mind. But our recommendation is if you adverse a loan and you create a second loan, it should sync to that same Velocify lead. And then maybe you decline that second loan or withdraw the second loan, and then there's another loan still for the same opportunity. It should also go into the same lead. So it might feel weird that you have 4 loans in Encompass, 5 loans in Encompass that are all associated with one lead in Velocify. But if it's just one opportunity in Velocify, that's what it should look like. Because the other way is if you were creating new leads in Velocify, now what ends up happening? Now it's super weird, right? Let's say that original lead came in from, I don't know, Lending Tree. You're welcome for the plug. Let's say it came in from Lending Tree. That first lead. Well, as that second, third, fourth loan is created in Encompass, if you have that creating new leads in Velocify, those new leads that get created into Velocify, they're not labeled as Lending Tree. They're labeled as coming from Encompass, which means now in terms of your lead source attribution, things can get out of whack pretty quickly. The other thing that you need to be careful of, and if you're not sure if this is affecting you, we can actually help you check it out. Currently, if you just have kind of a universal rule that says you're always going to sync it into the same lead in this situation, so you have one lead and 4 or 5 loans, there's a good chance, can't guarantee it, but there's a good chance in your Velocify system that any time that you have the first lead adverse and you're having the additional loans syncing into that same lead, that it's actually not syncing past your application or file started status. It's not letting you know when it becomes a funded loan. I'm not going to get into the technical reasons why, and you're probably thinking, Ben, that's nuts. It might be nuts, but it also might be true. So if you're not sure, again, we can do a quick little audit for you. It takes a couple of hours, a quick audit, and I can come back to you and say, hey, by the way, I'm just going to show you one example right here of where you had a lead that had 2 loans. The first one I assume was adverse. The second one, I can't tell you if you funded it or not because Velocify has no idea.
That's challenging.
Yeah, and it's a little scary when you hear it for the first time. Like, wait, what? And that's the interesting part is if you're not using this adverse loan concept to make the distinction between how you want to handle the two and you're automatically treating them the same, then you're going to have, in all likelihood, a problem of either having all of these extra leads coming in that are funding that you're attributing to Encompass or something instead of Lending Tree or whatever source, or you're going to be syncing it all back to the right lead source, but it's not syncing past the application status at all. Both are bad. And unless you're making the proper distinctions and unless you're handling the technology right on the back end, which again is complicated, you're going to run into one of these problems almost no matter what.
And then, the fact of having a lead that, let's say you're trying to use Priority View for your pre-qual follow-ups, pre-approve follow-ups, and you've already adversed it. Now the lead's sitting there and your LOs are saying, well, why is this lead still here? I already adversed it in Encompass. Now it's still in my view. And what that ultimately leads to is distrust. And when they start to, distrust the system and distrust the strategies and all of that, it leads to them not following the best practices on a number of other things. So it has this trickle down effect we've seen over time that ultimately can affect the organization many different ways other than just this actual use case itself.
Absolutely. All right, so that was the biggest one that we were going to talk about, is the multiple loans. I've got 4 more things. I'm going to go through these fairly quickly because these are all kind of smaller, but as I mentioned them, you might be thinking, oh yeah, that affects me. I'd like to be able to address that. As Scott said, we want to keep this to 30, 35 minutes, so I'm going to go through these fairly quickly, but feel free to take note of any of these, and like I said, let us know. Matching, when you've got a loan that's created in Encompass, let's say by way of your online application, and you've got a lead in Velocify, we keep talking about matching them, but how do we match them? And if you've ever tried to match on phone number, you know that the duplicate checking in Velocify says that you have to be matching day phone to day phone, mobile phone to mobile phone, and it doesn't go across. We've got a solution that helps with that, not 100%, but probably like 90%. Pretty good help there. So if you have frustrations with the phone numbers mismatched and it not matching because of that, again, let us know. We can talk about some options there. Another item that may come up, if you're doing the export from Velocify to Encompass, which some lenders do more of, some less. If you get an error, if a loan officer gets an error when trying to do that export, they may not know it. And there are some things that we can do to help to let the loan officer know that, hey, it was an error, it didn't go through, here are your options, so we can help address that one. Another interesting one is, as again, many of you probably know, when you're using the Velocify Encompass sync, and especially the what's called the lead create feature, which is where new loans in Encompass create new leads into Velocify, you have to have your default status in Velocify as Encompass created, or maybe you've renamed it, but whatever it might be. You have to have it that way in order for the integration to work. But what that also means is whenever a loan officer may go in, it doesn't even have to be a loan officer, whenever anyone goes to add a new lead to Velocify, so you choose add new lead, the system will default to assume that it is Encompass created. And what ends up happening is when you're doing your reporting later, your troubleshooting, and you look at these leads and you say, well, this lead came from Encompass and it's in the attempting contact status. How did that even happen? Well, the reason that happened is because your team member added a new lead and never changed the lead source. So it still says Encompass created, which is not right. So we have a way to help you address that in terms of automated adjustments to the leads, notifications to managers. We can do all kinds of different things. But if that resonates with you, definitely let us know, because I can pretty much guarantee that it's happening. And if you're not sure if it's happening, let us know. In about 10 minutes, I can tell you if it's happening and how much it's happening.
Yeah, I had a conversation 2 weeks ago with a client who said, man, we just need more of these Encompass created leads. That lead source is really good. It converts really high. How do we get more of those leads? So that was pretty funny.
Yeah, there's a lot of things like that where people don't necessarily even realize that when they started the Encompass created thing, they don't necessarily know what it means when it says lead source Encompass created. They don't realize that their loan officers can create them accidentally. There's just a lot going on in your Velocify. It's hard to kind of get a good understanding of what those different pieces are. And by the way, if you're watching this and you have no idea what we're talking about, you're going to want to ask us.
Mm-hmm.
Trust me.
No doubt.
All right, last thing on my little list here. And again, if this doesn't resonate with you on this one, I wouldn't worry too much about it, because this has a lot to do with how your Encompass system is set up. But if it does resonate, let us know. In certain Encompass environments, a loan officer will be allowed to create a new loan in Encompass that has minimal information, not including, let's say, an email address or a phone number. If a loan officer creates a loan like that, quite often what they'll do is they'll say, okay, I got a borrower on the phone. I just want to create my loan in Encompass. And I want to do it quickly. Now, we know they can take a little bit of time in Encompass. So what they'll do is they'll put like first name and last name and save. It'll save. It can take a little bit of time, and then they'll continue their conversation and they'll start collecting the rest of their information. Then they'll hit save again. Depending on when the Velocify sync runs, and it's somewhat random, so you won't know when it's going to run. But if the Velocify sync runs after they save that lead with just the first and last name, but before they put in the rest of their contact information, the ability to match that lead or that loan to the leads in Velocify, you lose it, because it's kind of a one-time check. Again, if this doesn't resonate with you, don't even worry about it. But if you feel like, hey, I've got a lot of loans in Encompass that sync to Velocify into the Encompass created status or Encompass created lead source, they're in Velocify, but there's another lead in there from the lead source originally, and they didn't match, and I have no idea why not. The email addresses are the same. The phone numbers are the same. I can almost guarantee it's because of what I just described. We have a fix for that as well.
That's a huge one. Huge one, especially, I think back to the day too of where, Lending Tree example lead or whatever lead provider the lead came in from 6 months ago, and they go and create a lead record with just the base information. Again, not enough to catch it to that, duplicate lead back in the past, if that's how you're handling that scenario, to again attribute it back to that lead record. So really good advice there. We do actually have a question that came through, and again, I'm going to remind everyone again to submit your questions in the chat. Chat came through from my buddy Mark. I'm going to throw it up on the screen here, see if this works the right way. There we go. There's Mark. So Ben, do the new loans replace the old in Velocify, or are they all there? Do they actually replace it? Regardless, how does conversion reporting handle the adverse loans, assuming there is actual replacement?
Okay, so this gets a little bit into the weeds, Mark, and good to hear from you. It gets a little bit into the weeds, so I'm not going to get too far into it. Obviously, you can reach out to us if you want to discuss it further. The basic answer is the lead that's in Velocify actually continues to sync with the adverse loan, but the adverse loan is going to stop being adjusted after a while, right? So it's technically not being replaced. Technically, what ends up happening is that second loan starts to sync into the existing lead it's actually using the duplicate management. We kind of force a sync is the best way that I would describe it, which means technically, and Mark, I think this is where you're going with it, technically, both loans in Encompass, if both of them were to be modified back and forth, then the Velocify lead would actually get updated back and forth also. Now, in the adverse loan situation, that's fine, right? Because the adverse loan is going to stop being modified for the most part, and you're good to go. If you see a lead in your Velocify jumping back and forth between different milestones that don't seem to make any sense, it's probably because you're not handling this correctly by tracking whether something's adverse or not. You're syncing two active loans to the same Velocify lead, and you'll see it jumping back and forth. It's one of the symptoms of the problems when you're not handling it in the way that we recommend handling it. So yeah, I don't know that replacing is the right word. Technically, they both will sync moving forward. They just kind of sync in different ways. And to your point, Mark, the idea that the initial loan was adverse and now we have a second loan is not something that kind of would be something you can report on easily, or I wouldn't say easily, not kind of in the out of the box way. If you wanted to track that in a way to say, track that there was a previous adverse loan, there's other kind of custom things that we can help you do in that regard. If you're interested in really knowing, hey, we have an active loan here, but we also had an adverse one, we can help with that. We usually find that most of that is done in Encompass, but we can help with that in Velocify as well if you wanted.
Awesome. No other questions have come in.
I got a question for you, Ben.
Yeah. Oh, here we go.
So one of the issues I had, and I don't know if it was just us or it happens more often with other lenders, but you mentioned a few different ways in which a loan could get started in Encompass. You've got, they can export it from Velocify. It can be a blend, Simple Nexus, Consumer Connect app that gets pushed in, or the loan officer could start the file directly in Encompass. Is best practices to come up with one way or one way of doing things for a lender, is make things easier, or because what we found, at least in my previous place, that we left it up to the loan officer a lot of times on how they wanted to start it, and it just became very complicated because there was multiple ways the leads were getting created.
So this comes actually full circle, interestingly, to where we started, which is best practices ideas versus how you can actually implement them. If I was starting a mortgage workflow from like a company from the beginning, to your point, Kevin, we would probably want to try to focus it in one place. So as an example, some lenders I know have it set up where they say the POS is where applications are entered, period. Meaning if the borrower is going to do it, obviously they do it through the POS. As a loan officer, if you're going to do it, you go to your LO facing portion of your POS and you do it there, right? And everything is focused in that one place. And in that way, it makes everything easier as you're talking about. But for any lender who already has things in flight, doing that it's pretty complicated, right? Because then if you have that scenario, we're going to go to a lender and say, listen, if you want this to be smooth, then what you do is you tell your loan officers that they can't go into Encompass and create loans anymore. We're going to actually turn that off, which some lenders do in certain circumstances, but you really have to have it very honed in. Plus, you have to have a POS that supports those types of things. Many loan officers say, look, the export from Velocify to Encompass is the key way that I do things. So are we going to take that away? But are we going to push everyone to do that? And this is where you kind of go round and round. So I can give you all kinds of best practices from a technology standpoint on what will work the best. But in my experience, for almost all lenders, LOs are already doing it in all these different ways. So let's make sure that we can accommodate in the best way for them.
Yeah, along the same lines of the POS stuff. I mean, the integrations we've done with a few where, as I look at kind of what I'm most proud of kind of the custom things that we've built for certain things is, for example, when the blend integration stuff that we've done that allows us to post lead IDs back, run things through duplicate management and post a lead ID back and have that lead ID follow that now POS application into Encompass, and then have Encompass, when they sync that back, we're able to then run through duplicate management that way. It helps eliminate the phone numbers being wrong, emails being different, all of the stuff. And now we have an actual record itself, a lead ID that we can say, we know for sure this is the record to merge it with. It's really, really interesting to start to layer in that POS component of all this, well, which is a whole nother, probably have a whole nother show on just that part alone itself, right?
And Scott, I'd say that's what we think about as kind of customized best practices, if that's even a thing, where, you know, we've seen so many different things in so many different environments where we can look at an environment and say, okay, because you have X, Y, and Z, our best practices says that you should do it this way, which is going to be different than someone that has ABC and ABZ or whatever the letters would be.
Right.
But that's where, you know, we can talk about best practices here in terms of the specifics, but it's just about addressing all of the topics that you need to address.
Yeah. All right. We are at our 35-minute mark. I'm trying to keep it nice and short for everyone on their lunch break. Kevin, Ben, any parting thoughts? Anything you'd like to add before we wrap up?
You want to do a quick teaser for the other two real quick?
Ooh, yeah, let's do that.
Quick teaser. Okay, I'll go through some stuff real quick. So the two that we've got coming up are the purchase scenarios and how you might want to address those specifically in a consumer direct Velocify type of environment, and duplicate checking. So on the purchase side, we all know that the biggest difference there is how long it takes to get those deals done, and there's realtors involved and things of that nature. The length of the time is huge, and we're going to be talking a lot about how you can take advantage of a longer loan life cycle, we can call it, or buying cycle, how you can take advantage of it being longer, which sounds like it wouldn't make a whole lot of sense. We're going to talk about how you can take advantage of the information you collect there to be even smarter about your follow-up.
That's my favorite one. Yep. Love it.
So that's on the purchase side. On the duplicate management side, if you've ever tried to navigate your way through duplicate management, what you may have found is sometimes the tool is extremely robust in Velocify, but sometimes you have to choose between kind of the lesser of two evils. If you've ever done duplicate checking, you may find that in certain circumstances, the history of your leads seem to kind of disappear, which sounds awful. You also may have found in other scenarios that you go to your Velocify reporting and it says, hey, from lead source A, you got 10 leads last week. And the lead source tells you they sent you 12. You're thinking, what happened? And it's, again, because of the way duplicate management is handling these things. And there's no perfect way to handle it, to be perfectly honest. But we're going to talk to you about the things you need to address so that you know what's going on, so that when those weird things happen, one of the weird things is going to happen. It won't feel weird because we'll explain why, but at least you'll understand what's going on so you can handle it appropriately.
Love it. Excited. This stuff is so much, you know, we probably sound so weird when we say we get so excited about this kind of stuff because everyone's like, this isn't very fun. But to us, it is. We're passionate about this. This is what, you know, gets us out of bed each morning, is really helping move the needle. We believe these are the three kind of key things we see out of the gate that most clients need to help with. So excited to share that with you guys over this summer. So Ben, Kevin, it's been real. We're right at 40 minutes. Appreciate your time today. Thanks for joining us for the Lead Management Masterminds live podcast. We'll have this on a podcast as well. We'll break it down and actually start doing our podcast stuff again. So thanks everybody for joining us. Also a little plug on June 8th. I'll be joining Dale Vermillion and Alex from Sales Boomerang doing another live podcast webinar around best practices around, from my standpoint, lead prioritization and how we can tackle those things for organizations to help make them better there. So join us there. It's actually a good charity part. Actually, it's going to cost you $10 to join. However, that $10 is going to go to a good cause. We have 3 organizations matching that $10 to help drive as much impact as we can to the charity, Mortgage Professionals Providing Hope, which is Dale Vermillion's charity. So hope to have you guys there. It's been real. Please look us up on sdpsolutions.com and click the free consultation button there, and we'll help you out with what we can. Take care. Have a great Friday. See you later.